of one of the most foresighted policies of the UPN Lateef Jakonde-led civilian government of Lagos State when he took over, which was the desire to improve transportation in Lagos and regenerate the city, which was the federal capital at the time. In 1982, the Jakonde government signed a $700 million contract for the Metroland project with a French consortium comprising of about 19 firms. The Lagos State government was required to pay only 10% of this money, while the balance was to be paid by the consortium. But Buhari scrapped the project, and Nigeria forfeited $60 million already deposited for the project. Even worse, Buhari ordered the judicial murder of Bernard Ogedegbe, who was sentenced to death under Decree 20 for a crime he committed before Decree 20 was enacted, whereas he carried a lighter sentence when he committed the crime. Buhari refused to accept any pleas to spare Ogedegbe's life. Hence, under Buhari, the state denied the individual his life at the whim of General Buhari. To summarize the state of security under Buhari's regime, Professor Wole Soyinka expressed shock that any Nigerian will ever contemplate voting for Buhari as a president. According to Soyinka, unquote, Buhari enslaved the nation. He gloated and glorified in a master-slave relationship to the millions of his inhabitants. It is astonishing to find that the same former slaves, now free of their chains, should clamor to be ruled by one who not only turned their nation into a slave plantation, but forbade them any discussion of their condition. Unquote. Buhari also abolished food subsidies in Nigerian universities and thereby prioritized the introduction of malnutrition into universities. Kayode Soyinka, the renowned journalist and author of Diplomatic Baggage, Mossad and Nigeria, the Diko Story, published in 1994, wrote, unquote, the Buhari government, in prosecuting its war on corruption, gave the National Security Organization, NSO, unprecedented powers of arrest and detention. The regime promulgated the State Security Detention of Persons Decree No. 2 of 1984, which gave the NSO the power to detain anyone suspected to be a security risk indefinitely. All forms of freedom were restricted, and there was vagrant deprivation of fundamental human rights. Decree 2, 1984, the State Detention of Persons Decree, was Buhari's sword of Damocles. Under this decree, journalists were hunted and jailed. More than a dozen press houses were closed down. Beko Ransom Kute, Tai Shelari and Haruna Ademu were all jailed under this decree. Labor unions and professional associations were proscribed and banned. The Nigerian Medical Association, NMA, the National Association of Resident Doctors, National Association of Nigerian Students, and the Academic Staff Union of Universities, ASU. The list was endless.
The impression that was created in the minds of people in the time of Buhari, especially Buhari and Idiagbo, was that this is the time to be sober, the time not to smile.
The Nigerian Bar Association, NBA, boycotted all proceedings of Buhari's military tribunals. There was the National Security Organization, NSO, Nigeria's first secret police service, which was on hand to intimidate, harass, and detain protesters and demonstrators, students, lecturers, critics and activists, and civil servants who dared embark on strikes. By October 1984, Buhari had retrenched 200,000 Nigerian civil servants. On the 15th of April 1985, Buhari announced the expulsion and deportation from Nigeria of more than 700,000 foreigners, especially from Ghana and other West African nations.
Africa continues to be economically and politically disrupted by the mass movement of workers expelled from Nigeria. Almost 900,000 have already returned to Ghana alone. Sometimes the convoy stretches for 300 miles. Many workers had to sell all their possessions to get this far. taxi and truck drivers are accused of charging outrageous prices, but many workers believe that staying behind in Nigeria meant prison or even worse.
And they are killing many people. If you don't go, your life is at risk. Whether you like it or not, you should leave.
The deadline of May 10th was set. All illegal immigrants must leave Nigeria in less than 4 weeks. It was a massive exodus, but it was not the first time this will occur. In April 1985, 6 Nigerians were convicted and condemned to death for drug trafficking by Buhari's Special Military Tribunal, most of them women. Lasukomi Awolola, Oladele Omoshebi, Jimmy Adebayo, Mrs. Sidikat Tairi, Miss Shola Oguntayo, and Gladys Iyama. Gladys Iyama, locked at the federal maximum security prisons in Kirikiri, was a crippled mother of 2 paraplegic children and was the first woman in the history of Nigeria to be sentenced to death by firing squad. The Buhari government knew the implication of executing a paralyzed mother of 2, and the sentence was secretly approved. The Gloria Okon case was rife. In 1985, Gloria Okon was arrested at the Aminu Kano International Airport on drug trafficking allegations. The case was traced to persons in government who provided security support for their couriers. Gloria Okon was said to have died in detention. The cause of the death was kept secret. Till date, Gloria Okon is a mystery dating back to Buhari's days in power. For a man with so much skeletons in his past, Buhari should have been compassionate enough to reach out to families of individuals who were victims of his brutish past and seek genuine restitution.
When Buhari said ruthlessly, he meant it. During the 41-year-old Major General's time in power, Nigerians came to understand what it meant to live in fear. With his partner, 41-year-old Major General Tunde Idiagbon, a program to save the country was designed. They called it the War Against Indiscipline, with emphasis on war.
Buhari is part of a past well let alone. Only the future should matter, and nothing about him speaks to Nigeria's future. On the 20th of March 1984, the Buhari Idiagbon regime launched the war against indiscipline. Why?
To little but important everyday manifestations of indiscipline, such as rushing into buses, constituting ourselves into public nuisances, working without commitment. Up to this moment, there has been no formal declaration of war against indiscipline. It is my pleasure, therefore, to declare today the launching day for the war against indiscipline.
The problems Idiagbon highlighted were real, and most of the solutions he suggested that day. The issue was how he and Buhari implemented their campaign. They pursued a brute force and highly physical campaign, which inevitably made them unpopular with ordinary Nigerians.
Many Nigerians will never forget the koboko, or bulala, or horsewhip lashes that lacerated their backs for not queuing up at bus stations, or for even dropping a piece of paper. Soldiers beat up policemen on the streets. Civilians were regularly harassed by uniformed men to the point that they were bloody civilians. Men were forced to do the frog jump, humiliated in front of their wives and children. Also, General Buhari's reign witnessed the beginning of religious fundamentalism in Nigeria. In February and March 1984, the Maitasili sect, under the leadership of Musa Makanike, unleashed terror on the populace in Yola, Adamawa State, and about 1,000 lives were lost. There was also the authoritarian Decree 4, under which it was a punishable offense for anyone to publish any material that was deemed as embarrassing to any government official. On the 11th of April 1984, operatives of the NSO arrested two journalists, Tunde Thompson and Nduka Irabo of the Guardian newspaper, were brought before a military tribunal and accused of forcefully accusing public officers, even if what the journalists wrote were right. On the 2nd of June 1984, a summon from the tribunal was sent to the accused, and it read, "From to Public Officers Protection Against False Accusation Decree No. 4 of 1984, summon to accused, that you, Tunde Thompson and Nduka Irabo of the Guardian Newspaper Limited, Rootham House, Isolo, on April 1, 1984 at Rootham House, Isolo, in Lagos, did publish false statement contrary to Section 1.1 of the Decree No. 4 of 1984. You are therefore summoned to appear before the tribunal mentioned above, sitting at Federal High Court on the 4th of June at the hour of 9 a.m. in the forenoon to answer the said complaint." Unquote. Their employer, the Guardian Newspaper Limited, was also accused. On Decree 4, Buhari has remained unrepentant. It did not matter whether the story reported was true or not. If my regime did not like it, the writer will go to jail. Bekolo Larry Ransom Kute, popularly known as Beka, was chairman of the Lagos branch of the Nigerian Medical Association and later its national deputy. In 1984, his brother Fela was arrested at the airport as he was preparing to leave for a U.S. tour on what Amnesty International described as spurious charges of illegally exporting foreign currency. Using the new draconian decree that allowed for indefinite detention of political opponents, the government of General Muhammadu Buhari sentenced Fela to 10 years in jail. Ransom Kute, using the Medical Association platform, began a campaign to get the decree revoked and get Fela and all those detained released. But in fact, Beko himself was jailed and only released in 1985 when Buhari was overthrown by General Ibrahim Babangida. Against the background of the judicial murder of Owo, Ogedengbe, and Ojuolape, one can understand the Sharia mindset of General Buhari. Even his actions predate that of the Taliban, a living modern-day apostle of the Hammurabi's code of law, an eye for an eye. Now, there was the case of the 53 suitcases involving the father of Buhari's ADC, the then Colonel Mustafa Jokolo, whose father was the Emir of Gwandu and Buhari's half-brother. Mustafa Jokolo helped his father, the Emir of Gwandu, to smuggle into the country through the Murtala Muhammad Airport 53 suitcases suspected to contain foreign currency, which the then administrator of the Lagos Airport Customs Command, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, was not allowed to search. This was in spite of the fact that the Buhari administration had placed a ban on importation of currencies. On the 5th of July 1984, a team of Nigerian security operatives led by Major Mohammed Yusuf and the Israeli Kassas were on hand to kidnap and bundle back to Nigeria Umaru Diko. Umaru Diko was drugged and put into a crate that was labeled as diplomatic baggage. An empty Nigerian Airways Boeing 707 plane was already waiting at the London Stansted Airport, waiting for him to be extradited back to Nigeria. He was abducted right in front of his home and put in a van and driven to the airport, where he was passed off as diplomatic luggage from the Nigerian embassy. Diko said in an interview with the BBC in 1985, unquote, I remember the very violent way in which I was grabbed and hauled into a van with a huge fellow sitting on my head, and the way in which they immediately put on me handcuffs and chains on my legs. The Nigerian Airways crew was detained. Buhari responded by ordering a British Caledonia plane that was already in the air, flying from Lagos to London via Kano, to be returned back to Lagos, where it was also detained by the Nigerian authorities. Immediately, the United Kingdom released the Nigerian Airways crew. Buhari also freed the British plane to fly back to London. 17 men were arrested and 4 of them were later sentenced to years ranging from 10 to 14 years. All of them were later released after spending 6 to 8.5 years in jail and were silently deported. Buhari retaliated too by promptly picking up 2 British engineers in Nigeria and slamming 14-year prison sentences on them. To get Umaru Diko, Buhari turned to an Israeli businessman and a conman known as Elisha Cohen. Mr. Cohen, who had originally come to Nigeria in the 60s, was a representative of Reynolds, a subsidiary of the Israeli construction company Sole Bonaire. And while in Nigeria, he became friends with a lot of military officers like Obasanjo, with whom he did a lot of business. Buhari gave Mr. Cohen $5 million, and with Rafindadi, who was the head of the NSO, and Major General Haladu Hananiya, the Nigerian High Commissioner to Britain, and Group Captain Bernard Bamfa, the Managing Director of the Nigerian Airways, they hatched the plot to kidnap Diko.
Did your government plan this kidnapping? Why was one of your officials at Stansted Airport last night?
I'm not aware of that.
You're not aware, but it was one of your officials.
I wasn't aware.
Why is the aircraft, the British Caledonia aircraft, held in Nigeria?
I'm not aware of that one.
Have you
Ask
been
the Minister.
What did you tell the Minister
Despite
General?
the High Commissioner's denials, 17 people, most of them Nigerians, are now being questioned about the kidnapping. 14 are being held at the high-security Paddington Green police station.
Most of the 14 are Nigerians, but 2 are believed to be Israeli mercenaries who were found inside crates at Stansted last night with Mr. Diko. The entire crew of a Nigerian freight plane that should have been leaving Stansted last night is also being questioned. Paul Davis, News at 1, Paddington Green Police Station.
Immediately after the Umaru Diko kidnap saga, the British satirical magazine Private Eye lampooned the incident and mocked Nigeria with one of its most famous headlines,
Fly Nigeria, it's a great way to travel.
According to Peter Enaura, unquote, it was the most dastardly act ever sanctioned by an African government outside its borders. The disgraceful incident took Nigeria's reputation into a tailspin worldwide, unquote. Even his secondary school classmate, kinsman, and friend, Shehu Yaradua, in his official biography, said his frustration with Buhari was, unquote, the absence of a transitional agenda, but he also regarded Buhari's failures as a result of overly authoritarian instincts, including his inability to maintain a united front among senior commanders. 1 year and 8 months after the terrible coup wrecked the Second Republic, the Buhari Ijagbon Double Act was thrown out of office in a classical palace coup.